People always ask for something new. It's inevitable. At 50, well, it stops.
Have you ever dreamt of a better version of yourself? Younger, more beautiful, more perfect. One single injection unlocks your DNA and will release another version of yourself. This is the substance.
I'm Sue.
You're hired.
Let's go.
A perfect balance of 7 days each. The one and only thing not to forget. You are one. You can't escape from yourself.
There's been a slight misuse of the substance.
This balance is not working.
Would you like to stop? Would you like to stop? Would you like to stop? Would you like to stop?
I'm fine. Everything's fine.
You have to control yourself! Old, fat, disgusting!
People are gonna love that.
Hi everyone, welcome to this new episode of Carolyn Talks. This is the podcast / YouTube channel where I, your host, Carolyn Hayes, film critic and journalist, speak to film creatives around the world about their work, the industry, and what inspires them. And today, I am very happy to be joined by my friend and fellow film critic and journalist, Candice Frederick, to talk about the film, the experience called The Substance by filmmaker Coralie Fargeat. This is her second film. So like, if it's her second film, is that what's called like your sophomore film? That's what it is?
Sophomore, yep.
Sophomore. So it's her sophomore feature film. Her first film, 2017, was a film called Revenge, which I actually did see. I actually saw that at TIFF. When I look back at it, I was like, oh wait, I did see this. I saw this film at TIFF. And yeah, both of these films are violent, but in very different ways. And we're going to get into that. But to describe The Substance a little bit, it stars Demi Moor as an aging former starlet who has discovered that stardom isn't what she thought it would be as she got older. And she, in order to kind of like adjust to the life that she has now, she decides to take this substance, this injection, that is going to make her life so much better than she thought it could ever be. And boy, does that not happen. And we're going to get into it. And I'm so happy to be joined by Candice to talk about this film because we actually saw it together at TIFF. So I'm very excited to be able to talk to her. So thank you so much for joining me, Candice. Yay.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad we finally worked this out.
I know, right? We said we tried to do this like more than
I know. It's probably my fault, so I apologize.
That's okay, you know, like that's life. But I think it's kind of fitting that The Substance is actually the film that we're gonna finally get to talk about this because it was one that we got to see together in the theater, right? So like, first of all, I would like to start out these kind of special episodes for the podcast and the YouTube channel by saying what instead of talking about the pros first, I want us to talk about the cons. So what necessarily about The Substance didn't necessarily work for you? Like, give us your overall thoughts on The Substance and then but go into like your cons of the film.
You know, I'm really hard pressed to find to think of cons because I was really immersed into the whole experience that is The Substance. The only thing I guess I would nitpick about is something that I thought of after I had left the screening was that we don't get a whole lot of details about Elizabeth. Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley both play the an older actor who is a phenomenal actor and like really beloved until she reaches a certain age. And as many older female actors could tell you in real life, that is generally when you start doing some altering. And this is what Elizabeth Sparkle does. But and to disastrous results, as we've seen in real life all the time. And so I would think I would have liked, because we were meeting Elizabeth at this very specific point in her life. And I think if I were to nitpick, I think I would have liked like a flashback into like what her aspirations were, or like, because I think I'm curious what I think would have grounded it just slightly. I thought everything was actually really well done, but like what would have grounded it even more is that if we saw some type of like a younger in like her as a child, kind of talking about like what she wanted to be when she grew up and why she wanted to be that, and then kind of flashing to the present and seeing how that all manifested and was just also distorted, and how she kind of navigated around that. But that's just a nitpick. I think everything really works for me. I found it, I left, and I think you said this as well when we left the screening together. I found it profoundly sad. Her whole journey through, just like, if you think about just like her knowing that this is actively destroying her, like she's actively destroying herself literally and physically, and she can't stop, not just because she's addicted, but also because she, as she says at one point, like toward like the climax of the movie, she hates herself. And that's, I found that deeply sad. And every time she would do another injection, gives herself another injection, I was like, oh my God, this is like really, really devastating. And so I think the body horror of it all compounds that and really brings home that point. And I think is a really, really good use of it. I mean, I've had a lot of issues with horror lately, but body horror has really done some very interesting things lately. And I think this is just one of the contributions. Like, I think it was really good. I think Margaret Qualley is also very, very good in it. She is literally like the embodiment of conventional attractiveness in Hollywood. And even she can't really hold that together. It's just a lose-lose situation at any age. But of course, like, it's better when you are younger and more accepted. So
yeah, like for you, I think one of the things that I did think about the film wonders, like, it would have been, I think, to give us a full idea of who Elizabeth is and who she was before she became Sparkle, the celebrity, would have been to get like a couple flashbacks of her, like a young girl of her, like you said, like, this, I want to be a star, like she's watching other like, for instance, like, I could picture a scene with a young Elizabeth watching another female celebrity on screen and saying, oh, I want to be her when I grow up, that's who I want to aspire to be. And then we get a midpoint where we get to see her actually being a celebrity, like what made her famous. We never really got an opportunity to see what made her famous, like she had a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. She won awards, and we really like, but exactly what did she win these awards for? Was she a film star? Was she a TV star? We didn't really get a full sense of who she was as a celebrity, because our very, very first introduction to her is her doing the like the kind of like televised exercise regimes, like people like Jane Fonda, like Billy Blanks, and like show these kind of exercise shows that are super popular from the 70s up to like the mid 90s. So we never really got to see how she went from being Elizabeth to Sparkle, you know. But and then another thing that I thought that I was pondering about, but I wonder if it has to do with just who she was and why she was able to do what she was, is that we never see her interact with anyone else. You know, she doesn't have any friends. You know, she doesn't have an exterior life. Like everything we see happens inside her home. You know, the only scenes that are outside the house are when she goes for the to collect the injections, or when she's at the studio. So I was wondering if like that's intentionally showing like she's such an isolated person, that part of the reason she's able to go through this extremely drastic transformation is because she has no one in her life to pay attention to her. So I was just wondering about it, because I was just like, who is she? Who is this woman? But so like my cons are kind of similar to yours in that way. Like we don't really get to know who Elizabeth was before we get our introduction to her.
Yeah, we know that she won an Oscar, so she was definitely a film actor. But and then we see like past, they don't talk about it, but they see like past movie posters that she's been in, like movies that she's been in. So there's not really a dialogue about it, but there is like references, visual references to it. But I agree that I think that it would have been nice to see a friend or a family member, but I also think that when you are of that age, which I despise that phrase with like a fiery like fiery son, I despise it just because we all are of a certain age, like literally everybody. And so I think when it came to her, when you get to that age, I think that there's such an isolation that she has. I think she's also been very singularly focused on her career. And I think that's anybody who is like single and childless, that is like everything. And when that is just ripped from her, she does crumble. So all of that, the isolation, just like the whole solitude of her life really made sense to me after thinking about it. But I did have to think about that because I was just like, oh, I wish there was somebody that's just like, hey, are you okay? And that doesn't mean that she would have done anything about it, but just somebody who would have checked in, because this is somebody who became an addict. And I thought about like all the numerous older female actors who have gone under the knife because of these standards. And then they are ridiculed because they, actually complied, with these standards. And it's just like, oh man, it's a slippery slope that you can't actually win. And we see it happen in this movie.
Yeah, and that's definitely going to go into the pros. But then another thing, the final con that I do want us to talk about, the runtime. Because we talked about this a bit before we began recording, but the film is long. The film is about 2 hours and 30 something minutes long. And there's reasons that it didn't need to be long, particularly two things. And I don't even think this is even a spoiler, because these two characters are completely inconsequential to the story. Because if you take them out, the film does not change. The narrative doesn't change. And that's the two boyfriends that Margaret Qualley's character has, the younger Elizabeth has. And it's just like these two sequences with these two men, like they add time to the film that is unnecessary, truly. Like, I'm like, why are you men here? You add nothing to the story. You're not adding any incisive dialogue. You don't care about this woman. Why are you here? Take them out, and the film goes a compact 2 hours max. Like, that's one of my biggest gripes of film. It is super long. It does not need to be that long.
I also really hate that so many films are long now. This one did not seem long to me. It seemed really tight. I would just say about the boyfriends, I think that is kind of what I took from that, is that this is when you are young, wanted, beautiful, you naturally, Margaret Qualley's version of Elizabeth is the epitome of what everybody wants, a significant other, or sex, or to be sexual, to be loved, all this stuff. And I think that was supposed to kind of be a part of the package that she was selling. And then you see that in contrast with the older Elizabeth, the Matrix, who has nobody, and nobody's actually trying. Actually, there's one person who is actually actively trying to go on a date with her, and she can't even like get herself together to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the runtime, I like you said, in the cinema, I didn't feel the runtime because I was so invested in this film. But then just on the principle alone that I just want filmmakers to like start being more economical with the times that they are making films with. Be mindful of the time, people. And this may sound trivial, but I was just thinking, okay, imagine go to like a nighttime screening for this film. Like this show had a midnight matinee screening at TIFF, and I don't do midnight screenings at TIFF because the subway stops running at like around 12:31. And if you miss the last train, you bus luck. You got to go and look for an Uber to get home. And from where I live to Toronto, to downtown Toronto, would be like 70 something dollars by Uber or taxi. And I'm just thinking, when I watch films and I just think about these things, okay, like if this film is 2.5 hours long, the person you like, how long is it going to take for you to get home? You know, like this is 2.5 hours out of your day. I legit think about these kind of things. And so when you have a film that's 2.5 hours long, I'm like, there's no need for it. Stop it. I just need filmmakers to like be economical with their time. But those are like just I think the cons of the film, and they're minute cons, but they're just like things that are just like the time, be economical of the time, people. And also I wish we had gotten to see a little bit of who Elizabeth was before our initial very first introduction to her. So but they're trivial, but still things worthy of consideration, I think.
For sure.
And so now in talking about the pros, so I want to start the pros talking specifically about the body horror aspect of the film, because the body horror in this film is very, very important to the whole storyline. Because you mentioned it, and so I want us to start there talking about body modification, plastic surgery. You know, the things that men do it too, but the film is specifically talking about feet, but women and female celebrities, whether they're actors, musicians, even sometimes athletes, people who are on TikTok, like they're have YouTube channels, they're like all of these things, like regular people, just like regular people like us, they're having body modification surgery. Something as minute as getting a nose job, a eye lift, fillers are a big trend now. The film talks about all this, and that's the body horror, that's the body modification. And me being a person who does not like body horror in films in general, just because it takes a lot for me to get squeamish, but I have this thing, I don't know if it's an empathic thing, but if I see someone getting cut, I get this weird sensation physically where I can feel it happening. So that's one of the reasons I don't like body horror in films. But this film had me so invested in it. I was just like, you know what? The body horror makes a statement in this film. It's a narrative device all on its own. So I want us to start talking about the body horror there, because the fact that I didn't get if I walk out this film, it's a testament to, I think, the fact that I think how important it is to this story.
I'm kind of on the opposite end where I'm like, the more body horror, the better. Like I'm a big horror fan in general. So I was just in love with that aspect. And I think a lot of people are kind of making the comparison with David Cronenberg's work, because his work, I haven't always loved it, but I think that he uses body horror in a very interesting way as well to further the narrative, which is what any great horror movie does. And I think this does that as well, to really bring home. I mean, like for me, I see an addict, and with Elizabeth Sparko, I see an addict, somebody who can't actually stop. And that again, that was so sad. And I think the body horror only amplified that sadness for me, not just the discomfort of watching her do that, but also just the sheer, you're both disgusted, but also like, this happens all the time. And people who watch this movie also have had plastic surgeries. Like, do you recognize some of this behavior? The addiction, the just like, you're actively hurting yourself like all the time. And for what reason? Like, it shows the futility of these modifications. And it shows her self-hatred. Like she said this herself, like she hates herself and she can't actually stop. And I think that's what this fishbowl of Hollywood really does, particularly to women, particularly to older women. And everyone is going to turn the same age if they're lucky. And so I don't know. I rail against the rampant ageism throughout the industry, and not just Hollywood. This is across many other industries. And so I don't know, that really struck me. I thought it was really good. And it's gruesome. It's like up until the very last moment of the movie, it's really gruesome. And the grotesqueness really mounts in the last like maybe hour. It gets there's like it gets creepy, it gets deranged, and it's also just like, you know, we're seeing an addict, we're seeing like this distortion of what addiction looks like, what perfection looks like. We see it in both versions of Elizabeth too. And so it's just like, and it's not just physical. You're psychologically, you have just dismantled, you know. So I thought that was really a really good use of it.
Yeah, you mentioned David Cronenberg, and I was looking at her the Wikipedia page for her. So like David Cronenberg is actually one of her main filmmaker inspirations. So it's like she lists David Cronenberg, John Carpenter, and you can get a real sense of John Carpenter's sense of like horror in the way she films or some particular scenes, not just for the substance, but in thinking about revenge too. There's ways how she gets like takes the camera right up to the grotesqueness, like you can't look away, like you know, like there's no part of the screen where nothing that you're looking at isn't going to gross her out. And that's very much a John Carpenter style influence. And also Michael Haneke. I know that, I mean, because I'm trying to think of like if I've seen any of his films, and I'm here looking up because
Michael Haneke did uh oh gosh, what's the name of that movie? That's very, very good. It's a Danish movie. And it was remade in English, which it should have never been remade. But
you know the one that came out recently, the one.
no, not that one. Funny Games.
Oh,
So
okay, yeah, looking at it, that was his. Oh,
I
oh,
so I see Funny Games a little bit in I see a little bit of Funny Games in it, only in that it's just continuing. It's torturous,
mm-hmm.
like Funny Games was. I don't see much John Carpenter actually. I mean, John Carpenter is really good with suspension slashers. And so, and I do think there's, I guess, mountain suspense, but
Works as a slasher film, like especially the last hour, like that whole bloodletting scene, like that was just
yeah, I can
over.
see that.
And it actually kind of reminded me of a Taiwanese film called Get the Hell Out of Her, which is a Taiwanese social commentary horror. That one came out, I think that was 2019, because it came out after it came out, I think 2019, because I saw it at TIFF too. And that one, when I saw that film, I was just when I saw that scene, I was like, it reminded me a lot of like Get the Hell Out.
Yeah, I see this 2020 was a horror comedy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like it has that kind of satirical horror thing. But the thing, like in talking about the body horror, the thing for me that fascinates me about a film like this, where it talks particularly about surgery and body modification, is that I've had surgery 4 times myself, 4 major surgeries. I've had cranioplasty surgery, so I have a titanium plate in my head. I had a thyroidectomy to remove a thyroid tumor, myomectomy, and a hysterectomy. And the reason I mention these is like when you have surgery, there is something in your brain that you have to switch off to get to the idea of like, my body is not going to be the same after this procedure, you know, and it kind of messes with your brain in a way. So, and when I think about people who do surgery to intentionally change your bodies, not necessarily for a health reason, like for tumors, or for instance, like there are plastic surgeries that are necessary health wise, you know, like for instance, if you have like a deviated septum, you might need to get a nose job so that you can breathe better or what have you. And but we're talking strictly because of cosmetic purposes. And it just like boggles my head that people, you may go do it once or twice or whatever, but then when you have to do like when you're doing like multiple times, like 8, 7, like there are people who have done like these kind of surgeries repeatedly to the point where like you don't like they look like a completely different person. I just wonder like how like that is where you know that it has to be an addiction, because there's a part of your brain that has switched off where you are willing to put yourself through general anesthesia, go like put your hands in your body in the hands of complete strangers to change it to not only please yourself but strain other people. You know, like for a lot of celebrities, they get these surgeries because they're doing it to please an audience. You know, like Elizabeth, she takes the injection to please an audience, you know, to please people on the side on the other side of the camera, people that she don't know, people who don't know her, but she's doing it because she thinks this is the only way she can matter, you know. And as you said, it is an addiction, but I think it's not only just an addiction to the surgery itself, but it's an addiction to needing that validation, to being
well, that's addiction. Yeah, that's what I'm referring to.
you're craving this validation because society has told us the only way you matter is if we tell you that you matter, you know. And that's what she's thinking. She's thinking that she doesn't matter anymore, so the only way that she can matter is if the younger her, the her that got the awards, you know, the her that was famous, the her that was pretty, the her that people wanted autographs for, that's the only part of her that was worthy. And so that's why she's putting herself through this grotesque and this extremely painful and mentally debilitating experience, because it's not just physically deforming, it's mentally deforming. You know, it changed her perception of herself, you know. Like when you think about it, the younger Elizabeth, the one played by Margaret Qualley, is a deformed concept of who she thinks is perfection. You know, she's vindictive, she's cruel, she's nasty, you know, she's mean-spirited. And one of the things that really made me really think that this film is very much is a very, very sad film, is the disregard that young Elizabeth treats old Elizabeth with, you know. Like she leaves her body there on the ground in the bathroom with no regard. She doesn't cover her with a blanket, nothing, you know, and she just leaves her there on the cold floor. And it just shows like you have to disconnect yourself mentally to get to this place.
Yeah, I mean, she hates herself, so she doesn't like that version of herself. It's not even just like, it's something so much more extreme than just getting plastic surgery to make yourself look a certain way. It is to be a completely different version of you. Like you have a completely different body that is now detached you have two different bodies at this point, and you have no use for the one that is a present day. You have no use for her. And the more you live your life as in this other body, the more you feel that the body of the present is actually more and more grotesque. I thought that was so profoundly sad. And that, you know, the fact that younger Elizabeth is, her currency is her sexuality, but also like, there's this understanding that when you reach the age of 50, you lack a sexuality, and you lack a sexuality that means you lack currency. And it's all, and how that's all tethered together is deeply disturbing. Like, I don't understand how that's not something that we don't try to dismantle every single day. We're still in a very youth-oriented culture, youth-obsessed culture, even in the way, you know, not even just in Hollywood. We talk about older people in a weird way. And so we talk about age in a weird way. You know, I think our relationship culturally with age is deeply disturbing. The way people are like, oh my gosh, I'm old, I'm age 30. I'm like, you don't think that's weird to say that? And it makes me sad. I'm just like, there's so many more decades. And so I guess you just die after 30. I don't know.
Right. And the thing, ism has always been a thing from the beginnings of man. But I honestly think social media has changed so much about our world in a way that I don't think even us who are conscious of it, who pay attention, really won't really understand until we are much older. You know, because like, for instance, you mentioned how people are so comfortable in insulting, especially women, about their age. Like, I'm always on Twitter, and as you well know, but I've had younger people who I guess like think that they aren't going to reach my age, call me a hag. And I'm like, I'm in my late 30s, I'm 41 now, but I'm like, that is not a hag. And the thing, and it doesn't hurt me or anything, but it's just like so weird for me to think about, like, do you not think that you're going to reach 40? Like, reaching 40 is a blessing. You know, like reaching 40 means that you have managed to walk out your door every single day and not get hit by a bus, you know, not get struck by lightning, not fallen sick, you know, that you haven't that you haven't gotten cancer. For me, as someone personally with a chronic condition like MS, and as I mentioned, who's been through 4 surgeries, I am like, nothing anyone can say to me can hurt me that way, because every time I had to go under general anesthesia, I had to say a prayer and pray and hope that I wake up, you know, like having surgery is a near death experience because there is the possibility of something going wrong, you know, and like maybe someone try to call me a hag. I'm like, you don't even know what I've been through. You don't know how, like, what I've been through to be able to wake up today and be alive, you know? So like for people to use age as an insult, I'm like, age is a blessing. It's not an insult. And the film is, and in the film, like for Elizabeth, she doesn't realize that her age is a blessing, you know, that she survived in an industry that has taken so many from so many people. Like I in the person that I always think about in this film, I thought about Marilyn Monroe. I've been thinking about Marilyn Monroe a lot. This film made me think about how she, like, we know about like how she herself was changed so much for Hollywood, you know, like her real name isn't Marilyn Monroe, you know, like her real name is
Jane.
She had a very country name, you know, and she was a redhead. She wasn't a natural blonde. She was a redhead, you know, and she changed so much of herself to fit into an industry to become the ideal beautiful woman. And that's not even who she was really, you know, like the ideal that people look up to for perfection isn't even who Marilyn really was, you know. And she was a very intelligent woman, you know. People talk about her looks, but she was a very, very intelligent and very well-read woman. And then even using another more contemporary example would be like Pamela Anderson. You know, Pamela Anderson, like when she got famous, like on Baywatch, like everyone knew her for her body, you know, and they even kind of made like similar comparisons to her and Marilyn Monroe. And because like she's very buxom, as you say, she has like a large chest. But when I see who Pamela Anderson now, like she's so comfortable in who she is as a woman now, you know, like she doesn't wear any makeup. She's like, I read an interview with her, she said she hasn't worn makeup for I think over like 10 years because makeup for her was camouflage, you know, and she's trying to find who she is now as an older woman. And like in watching the film, I wished that Elizabeth had come to that same revelation that someone like Pamela Anderson had, you know, like you don't need the makeup, you don't need the body modification to like be happy in yourself. I was like, girl, go travel, go get on a plane and go to somewhere, go to Italy or something. Why are you doing this to yourself? You could be traveling somewhere else.
She literally lost her job. She lost her entire bankroll. You know what I mean? I mean, when people are continuing to tell you that you don't matter anymore and that your eggs are dried up, you know, you're not sexy anymore. And women, if they're not sexy, then they should just cease to exist and also cease to work and everything. It's a weird thing. I mean, even the way in which we talk about continually, even beyond the film, we talk about just like older people with jobs. And I'm like, my grandmother worked when she was in her 80s. You know why? Because we're in a country that does not support life, medical insurance for seniors very well. And so it's just like, you gotta get back, you know, I mean, like I think I said earlier today, actually, I was just like, there's always like, and this is way more compounded for women, but it's like, anytime you see an older person just living their life outside in public, there's for some reason seems to be cause for alarm. Like, oh my gosh, were you forced out? Was there elder abuse? Blah, blah, blah. I'm just like, they're just getting groceries. They're just living their life. But it's just like it's such a grotesque thing to see an older person. And I think it's weird that we don't talk about how deeply effed up that is. And that is why she does what she does. She doesn't do it. I think we only really see her kind of fall into this self-loathing pattern after she loses. The only thing that has really made her happy, has given her any type of importance, is her job. I mean, when you think about where people center their jobs, particularly here in the US, it's just like it's tethered to money, which is tethered to your happiness, which is tethered to your your idea of yourself and like what you're actually able to do, what you're able to accomplish, who you might, and if you're happy, you might be able to attract somebody who, you know, everything's really related. And so like when you lose that, you really lose an extension of a lot of things. And when it becomes like your entire like people get, really addicted to fame and celebrity and feeling loved by a whole bunch of strangers. That is also an addiction. And for women, it's terrible because it's terrible to learn, even though you've got an Oscar, as Elizabeth Sparkle did. She had this post-movie career. Say what you want about it, but she had a post-movie career in televised aerobics. And because she reached a certain age, she is not allowed to do any of that. And it's this understanding that you're no longer sexy because I said so. And like, it's just some arbitrary like point of view.
The thing about it, you mentioned the televised aerobics, and that is a good way to describe it, because I was trying to figure out exactly what I call this profession. But the thing is, like, she's physically fit, she's thin, she's toned, like, because she's exercised, so she's physically fit. Her face, she still has a very attractive face. Her hair is long, and she has a nice personality. Like, you see, like, and the reason that she's nice is that, even though I did mention at the beginning, like, we don't get to see her interact with any friends, is like the reason that she even thinks about taking the substance, the drug, is because you can tell that she's profoundly lonely and she wants connection. And so she thinks that people don't want to be her friend unless she looks a specific way. But then you mentioned, like, the person that tells her that she's no longer wanted or needed is this man, this agent Harvey, played by Dennis Quaid. And I love that Coralie does with this character is show how gross he is himself. He's a gross man. Like, the way he eats is so violent. He eats violently. He's so casually mean and dismissive. He says things, and it's like, for us, the onlookers, we're looking and say, why would you listen to anyone who's like this? But that's the industry. That's the world. We're supposed to put stock in things that these men say. Men that we ourselves aren't even attracted to, men that we ourselves know are mean and gross and dismissive. But, like, we're told to value their opinion. So for her, she's like saying, well, if he already says that I'm no longer of value, that I'm no longer what people want, even though they had ratings, he didn't mention anything about the ratings. So it wasn't that she wasn't getting audience, like, she still has an audience. But because he thought that she had gone past her limit, that's when she started to judge, doubt herself. And I thought that was something that Coralie did that was brilliant, where she's saying, why do we as women believe men that look like this? Why?
Because he writes her paychecks. Like, and that's really why. I mean, like, if she was writing her own paycheck, I would be like, screw him too. But, like, he's writing her paychecks, and he represents a Hollywood that's writing the paychecks. And so it's kind of impossible not to really take that to heart. And I also think that the body horror, I mean, it's not so much body horror, but even just like the eating horror of it is like, what I talked about in my coverage of the movie is really about, how he does represent Hollywood, but also just like how he's also I think he's at least like 10, 15, or maybe 20 years older than Demi Moore, who is gorgeous in this movie. In the very beginning, she is just a jaw dropping, and then to have all of that crumble when this guy, who really represents an institution, he's not just one person, he represents an institution, to just say that you actually are not any of those things. And also, to prove it, I'm going to take away your lifeline. That's awful. It's devastating.
It is. And I just looked it up. So, like, Demi Moore was born in 1962 and Dennis Quaid was born in 1954. He's just a year younger than my mom. But she's younger, but she again has this man who's older than her telling her that she's past her prime, but he's still getting to have a career. Because again, it's about patriarchy. It's about misogyny. It's about how Hollywood, the world, functions on patriarchy. And the thing is, fun fact, one of the fathers, as you would call them, of plastic surgery was actually a man, because plastic surgery is still a relatively young surgical procedure. And if I remember correctly, the person who performed the first eye lift surgery, plastic surgery started with this man, he was a military doctor, a U.S. military doctor in South Korea. And he invented the eyelid surgery because he wanted to experiment on Asian women, the Korean women that were living on the bases at that time. And he came up with the double eyelid surgery purely because he was experimenting. Because he was like, oh, I want to make these Asian women look more white. So when you think about even just the history of plastic surgery as a procedure like that, it's all about men looking at women's bodies and thinking, what could I do to make you look more pleasurable to me? How can I alter your body to make you fit my ideal? You know, like it doesn't matter if they fit a woman's ideal. It's all about the male gaze, you know, and it's all about what and how we women have internalized misogyny and torture ourselves mentally and psychologically and physically to please men who don't give two damns about us, to please a society, a culture that doesn't care about us. Because like for young Elizabeth, Margaret's version of Elizabeth, she herself would eventually get discarded too. You know, it's a cycle. It's a very, very vicious cycle.
Lose situation. And yeah, I mean, it's you also have to get, I mean, like in both instances, even the one that you were talking about with Korean women and with Elizabeth Sparkle, it's really important to also add that everybody agreed to it. Everybody was just like, hey, he sold, this is what I need, this is what I want, this is all, you know, whatever the selling points were. And we saw it with Elizabeth, like it did give her career back. It did give her will to just like be sexy and be like wanted. It gave her everything that she was losing in that moment. It did everything except like she was not who she actually was anymore. And it was just eroding her entire mental capacity. It was just like, it was deeply, deeply sad because it is like, you know, when you are in that space where people are paying, you know, paying your checks or like giving you checks, that's like, you're not in a position where, and that's generally the case across every industry, women are not in the position to pay themselves generally.
It is true. Like even and this is where I want us to talk a bit about Demi in particular, because like, as we had talked about before, like she was the perfect casting for a character like this, because the trajectory of Elizabeth Sparkle in the film, the history that we saw, is kind of mirrored in Demi's trajectory in Hollywood. You know, like I want in the mid to what was it, from like the early 80s to like the early 2000s, I would say Demi Moore was it. You know, like one of my favorite films ever is G.I. Jane, you know, and this is where she was physically fit. She was the buffest she'd ever been, and she's playing a woman she was playing a woman who went into a male-dominated field, the United States Marines, and she was training to be a special ops officer. Like and it was a position, again, she was wanting to be the first woman in this position. And fun fact, Viggo Mortensen was actually, I guess you could say, the antagonist of that film, because he was brutal with her. And like, he was, you want to be a woman in this space? I'm going to treat you worse than I even treat the men, because you got to, you know, you don't even got to be twice as good. You got to be 4 times as good. So I'm going to treat you even worse than I treat the men. And so when I thought about how this film is, again, like how this is another film where her body gets put through so much to fit the ideal of male perfection. You know, I was just like, Demi Moore, just on having that background, was perfect for this. But then also, it's just like, again, you look at her, she's still an extremely beautiful woman. She's still an extremely attractive woman, you know? And you look at her and you say, how could you look at her and say she's not valuable as a performer, you know? How could you look at her and say she's past her sell-by date as a performer? Like, who wouldn't want to go to see Demi Moore in the film, you know? But that's exactly what's happening. Like, when I honestly couldn't remember the last time I had seen Demi Moore in a film that got as much hype as this one. And I was just thinking, like, for Coralie and her casting director, like, whose ever idea it was for her to pick Demi Moore, it was just like perfect. So I want us to talk a bit now about her performance. So talk to me about how you saw Demi's performance in this, because her performance is what makes this film work.
Yeah, I mean, I I think she's really, really fantastic in it. I think she put kind of, it seems like she put, and from what I've read, she put like a lot of her own experiences just being a woman in Hollywood into her performance. That is obviously heightened with the body horror, and not just with the body horror, it's just heightened with the plot. And so I think she's really good. I've always thought she was a really good actor. I mean, one of my favorites from her is A Few Good Men. I mean, I think everybody's really at their top tier in that movie. But I can name a number of other movies that I really thought that she was good in. And she, like many other women, around around her age, and this is why I think ageism is so crazy, because it's just like we're all, if we are fortunate, all going to get to that age. So I don't know why we're so incredibly mean and dismissive of people who are older than us. It's so crazy to me. But it to get back to Demi, we did see, and she has attested to the same thing. We saw like her career just kind of fall out of the spotlight. Um, and because I'm sure the same thing happened where it's just like, okay, well, we're making room for a new generation. And it's just like, well, what happens to these older actors, that these older female actors in particular, who also have something to give, also can tell really interesting stories. I mean, like, interesting stories about sexual women in their 60s or any of that. I mean, to go on a little bit of a tangent, I know I'm kind of all over the place right now, but it's something I think about a lot, is the fact that we don't have we've never seen before or since another Golden Girls. Nothing has come along. And that is such a crucial like image of older women just living. And we just don't like that. That's never going to be on TV again, I guess, because it's because of the way in which we look at older people. And to bring it back to Demi Moore and the substance, that's why we don't see more of her, more of so many others. She's not the only one. There's so many others who just kind of drop out and do, I think Isabella Rossellini was talking about this too, where it's just like she had to go into a completely different career. I think Lucy Liu also did the same thing. I mean, like, these people aren't even like, you would think they were, I don't know, I don't know, just like really, really just incapacitated. These are just like regular older women, and they are of no use to Hollywood. And it's so critical, because like people don't have anything to really understand, that people who are watching movies with older people, it gives them an image of what life is and how it could kind of be very similar to the life that you're living now, or evolve. And it's just like people don't have that image anymore. It's just like you fall off. And it's just really exacerbates the ageism issue. But to me, Moore is, I think she's good in it, but I also think that Margaret Qualley is really good in it, in a performance that I think people are kind of reducing as like, you are pretty girl. It's just like she has to be the extension. She's basically Demi Moore's version. She's the extension of her psyche, essentially, what her desires are. And you see her kind of erode, her version of Elizabeth Sparkman erode. I think they are brilliant side by side. Yeah, I think you need both of them to really make the other one make sense. And so yeah, I think it's really good.
No, I agree, because they complement each other, and they're balanced. And the way what I think Coralie did really brilliantly with these characteristics, as I mentioned, that Elizabeth, the Demi's Elizabeth is nice. She's very self-effacing. She's not combative. She's not confrontational. And then there's Margaret's Elizabeth, who is she grows increasingly mean as the film progresses. And I think one of the reasons that she gets increasingly mean is that she becomes the psychological manifestation of where Elizabeth is physically. Like the more that Demi's Elizabeth physically starts to break down, the more that Margaret's Elizabeth starts to get more mentally broken down, till eventually they coalesce at the end, where the psyche and the physical match up, and like the exterior matches the interior, and like they work. So I didn't see Margaret as just like a pretty face. I'm like, no, she is showing you how new younger actresses have faced potentially worse than their older counterparts, because now again they have social media, they have Twitter, they have Instagram, they have TikTok, they got to do all of these things to be all to all of these people, and they have to do as much as possible to stay as physically beautiful as possible, because the camera is right there. The camera is less forgiving than the cameras of like, back in the things, because I was paying attention to the cinematography, and her cinematography is very different to the cinematography for Demi's. A lot of Demi's shots are a little bit more distant. The camera is a bit further away from her, whereas for Margaret, the camera is right up in her, right up on her face, on her body. Like all her body parts are just like taking into these, like she's just body parts. Whereas Demi, she gets a bit more distance where we get to see her as a bit more of a whole person. So I'm like, Margaret, her character is very much about Hollywood now, about society now, and like how young women have their own issues with fitting into patriarchal idea of beauty, of like, of wanting to fit in. And something that I thought was interesting in looking at Revenge, I actually thought she was an actress from Revenge. And I would love to ask Coralie this question, like, clearly you have a physical type with your young actresses because they look like sisters. They could be twins, but it's two completely different actresses. And I would love to ask her if this is because, because I was fascinated by her casting, because she's supposed to be this whole idea of beauty. I'm like, she looks just like a regular girl that I see walking down the streets here in Toronto.
It's funny because like I don't see Margaret Qualley's version as mean. I see her mean only to the like Demi's version. That's the only, everything else she is living to please everyone around her and makes her super hyper nice.
Like a Barbie doll.
Yeah, except when it comes to herself, essentially, she despises age and how useless, like she becomes really useless to her. Like I'm not even going to like do like the basic steps I'm supposed to do with these injections anymore, because she's so useless to me. But like what the film really plays with very well is just like you actually need each other, because you will start to basically crumble if she is also not healthy. But it really just messed with her head, where she was just, she meaning Qualley's version, was just like so obsessed with just like, I have to make this work. I have to be happy. People have to be happy. People have to love me. It was this very slippery slope, and you see her really decay, and she decays and the other one decays. So it's just like, it's a lose-lose situation trying to appeal to this standard. But also like you can't not try to appeal to this standard, because you can be beloved and young or older and broke, So if those are the two options, it's like, it becomes like, sure. Those are not
things. And you mentioned Isabella Rossellini, and I thought it was interesting that you mentioned Isabella Rossellini, because for women like us, we love Isabella Rossellini. Like she's gorgeous, but she has, as an actress, she just has this presence on screen. And then in talking about ageism in Hollywood in particular, the film Good Luck Leo Grand came out in 2022, and that stars Emma Thompson. And that film is very much about older women being again told that they're no longer useful or attractive if there's no men around them to say that you are beautiful or attractive. And there's a scene at the end of that film that I love. That scene actually made me cry, because out of everything that happens in the film, it's the scene where Emma Thompson stands in front of that mirror, like butt naked, and she just looks at her body, and I love it because it's like making us, the audience, again, have to look at her. You can't finish the film unless you look at Emma Thompson's body. And it just kind of made me think of why is it that we tell women that our bodies no longer look attractive if we don't fit this Barbie doll, quote unquote, aesthetic, you know, like perfect curves and this, you know, everything has to be lifted and tucked and smooth.
You're not like, if you're past 50, that's
right?
really tough.
And then the thing about it, you mentioned Isabella Rossellini, like she was in one of the last James Bond's film. Was it the last one? Or was it the one that came before? And I remember my sister and I, we were watching and we were saying that's who James should be with because she's his age, you know. But instead of putting James with her, they put him with the younger actress who was like 30 years his senior. And it's just like Isabella, like who would not choose Isabella Rossellini? But it's like, again, they're saying through the film, oh no, like she's not attractive, she's not worthy of James. Let's give him this woman who's young enough to be his granddaughter, you know, to be his love interest. And so, like, again, the film is very much talking about how, like, Hollywood in particular influences the way that we see women, you know, like how we women see ourselves because of Hollywood, you know. And I think the film is very much saying, like, do away with that, because what is the point of it at the end? You know, why are we pleasing these people who don't care about us, who, when you're broken and sad, like they're going to discard you anyway, you know, like they're not going to see you at, like, because the scene, and I'm not really going to spoil it, but it's the scene where she's on the stage and she's like, it's me, Elizabeth. And all they're seeing is the grotesqueness, you know, the things that she's done to change her body to please them. And they're still saying, it doesn't matter because you're not who we want you to be anyway. And then she only realizes what, it was all a wasted effort, but it was too late, you know. And I think that's one of the things about the film, is telling you, like, appreciate yourself before it's too late, before it, like, is impossible to do it. And I think, to me, like, and I think the marketing for, and this is where we're going to start, I want to start talking a little bit about TIFF now, is because the marketing for the film is so interesting, because the marketing for the film is geared towards, oh, come to the cinema to see this grotesque movie, this movie that has audiences gasping and screaming and reacting in this way. Whereas for me, like, I don't even see the film as that. I see the film very much as a social commentary film. You know, it's very much about women, is very much about women learning to, I think, appreciate ourselves. And I think the film has such a deeper meaning now what its marketing is about. And for TIFF, like, unintentionally, almost every single film that I saw, minus a film called Herman, which is a South Korean action film, had a theme about women basically learning to appreciate themselves, you know, learn to appreciate each other, whether it's mothers and daughters or our friends, you know, like, learn to appreciate ourselves. Even the film Wild Robot is basically talking about, you know, like, what is my place in society as a woman? And maybe I may be a robot, but, like, what is my place in society as an adoptive mother to this young duck? You know, what can I offer to say? But then, like, what can I offer myself at the end of the day? So, like, even a film like Wild Robot, all the, like, had themes of, like, women just coming to a point and saying, you know what, society, you are turning out to be way more hurtful to me than it should be.
I don't even think the substance actually, she ever realizes that. And I think that's why it ends the way it ends. And I think most women don't really realize that, you know what I mean? Especially when your checks are being cut because you are this way, you're never really going to realize, because it doesn't actually matter if you realize that. You have to live, you have to thrive in this space. So it's it's futile. But to your point about the way the substance is marketed, I think that's been bothering me. I think people have a weird relationship with body horror, or, I mean, no, I'm sorry. People have a weird relationship with horror in general. And I think any good horror has allegorical themes, just like any other good movie. So I think, I don't think this movie does anything different for the genre. I think it represents the best of the genre that we've seen numerous other times, but horror just gets shitted on all the time. And so people don't really understand that. And I think that people, when they're really playing up, like, oh my gosh, it's so grotesque. And I'm like, I mean, yes, and there's and also, do you not want to pull back the layers of why it's so grotesque? what it's actually pointing to. It's very, very reductive. And it's unfortunate for the movie. And particularly like, if I hate to get involved in these conversations, but just like if we talk about it in the sense of like, the Oscars or things like that. I mean, typically horror doesn't really, the Oscar voters don't never really care about horror anyway. But and a lot of the times because they reduce it to body horror, no, they reduce it to just like grotesqueness and like bumps in the night. And I love grotesqueness. I love bumps in the night. So I don't have any issues with those things, but like the fact that that's all you see is deeply reductive. And I think that is that points to a larger problem with how we talk about horror in general.
No, I agree because like as you said, like for me, some of my favorite films are horror films. And the reason for that is because horror to me really works if, as you said, it's allegorical, if it has a purpose, if it has a message, it's saying something, like my all-time favorite horror movie is Train to Busan. It's the Korean film. The reason I love that film so much is that the director and writer Yeon Sang-ho, he's using this whole idea of zombification as a metaphor for capitalism, about how capitalism just eats away at society. How the train is modernization. The train is we're on this fast moving train of modernization and progress, but where exactly is it taking us? If it's being driven by capitalism. And like everyone misses that because people's like, oh, it's about zombies. I'm like, the zombies are literally a metaphor, and it talks about again, it talks about patriarchy and like how the one of the main characters in the film is played by Ma Dong-seok, and he is a subversion of the macho man. Like he's big and muscular, but he's the most caring person on the train because he's the one who protects everyone. He doesn't use his size and brawn to hurt people. He uses it to protect people. But people are like, oh, I want him to slap people. I'm like, this is not what that's about. But like you said, like, and like for me, the substance is horror, but it's like, what exactly is the horror? Is the horror the blood, the guts, and the gore? Or is the horror really society's judgment, perception, and the things that it does to women? To me, that's the real horror. And that's why I love a film like this, because it made me really think about body horror. Me being as squeamish as I was, pay attention to what Coralie Fargeat is saying, and like again, like you talk about the horror, like the Oscars. One of the reasons I don't even no longer put stock in Oscars anymore is because it discounts genres like horror. It chalks. They don't even. I can't even think of the last horror film that ever even got a nomination for like best screenwriting. Or for even things like production design or costume design. Like this film is brilliantly shot. Like the costume design, the cinematography, production design, sound design. Oh my gosh, the sound mixing in this film is fantastic. But will any of that get recognized because it's a horror film? And likely not, right? And it's just like, and I think it's so funny that Oscars have gotten that way because horror was one of the first genres of films that really made Hollywood become Hollywood. Films like Frankenstein's monster, Nosferatu. Horror films really made Hollywood into what it was, but they've completely discounted it and turned it into this gimmick. And I'm like, you wouldn't even be where you are without horror films. What are you talking about?
It's really terrible. It's really, really terrible. Yeah, but like I like it as a horror. Like it could have been a straight drama, and I think you wouldn't have gotten to what like the uneasiness of it. I think that's one of the beauties of horror is that it gives you that sense of uneasiness of the everyday life. And this is, by all accounts, this is everyday life. A woman just evolving in her life, and she's having a terrible time transitioning for reasons that are entirely understandable. But yeah, it's I can go on a whole long diatribe about just like the how people just talk about horror and just like there's absolutely nothing. There's nothing wrong with the fact that this is horror, and I think there's something wrong with people's relationship with people's understanding of horror too. It's just like horror can do so much and more because of the heightened element of horror. But yeah, I think this is a really good use of it.
It is. It's horror, it's social commentary, it's comedy,
But I think that's what any great horror is. Any great horror has commentary. It's not, there's not one, or it's not separated. It's every great horror talks about, you know, a lot of other things that we can kind of bring to it, and that is bringing to us. I mean, you can go all the way back to Nosferatu. It's doing the exact same thing. This is not new.
it's not. And because even thinking about, like, she meant, like, I mentioned earlier, like, one of her influences is people like John Carpenter. Like, even like films like The Thing or Sunshine. I love Sunshine. And again, it's just like, sometimes to me, one of the reasons that people don't give enough respect to horror is that I think a lot of people don't really fully understand horror and what horror is supposed to do. And I think a lot of that, and this is where I would blame Hollywood, the industry, and I'll even put some blame on film festivals and how, like, film festivals market horror and they kind of subject horror to, like, the Midnight Madness category, where instead of putting horror films on me, like on regular screenings, they're like, Midnight Madness, horror films, late at night, inaccessible, and calling it madness, which has a negative connotation to it.
I mean, I love the idea of watching horror movies when it's pitch dark at night. I love that. I just can't do midnight. I can't watch anything at midnight because it's just gonna be watching me in like 20 minutes. But like I love that, and I love that, because there is a frenzy, like any horror fan, like a rabid horror fan, there is a madness around their fandom. And so like I get that, but like, it is often kind of separated. It's just like there are these films, these like the real films, and then there's the horror films. And it's just like, well, horror is a real film, but yeah.
Right? They don't give these films the same level of not only attention but promotion and respect as they do, for instance, a film like, I'm not even going to watch about using, for instance, a Megalopolis, because of who the filmmaker is, or who the cast is, like, you know what I mean? And it's just like, and not only just with horror, but even things like, one of the reasons I'm a champion for short films is just like, I think filmmakers that make short films do such a fantastic job telling such a concise story in like 20 minutes or less, that you wish that these big name filmmakers, I'm like, you need to go and take some cues from some short film filmmakers and learn how to tell a more a timely, economical film in 20 minutes or less. I would like to see Francis Ford Coppola, Steven Spielberg, or James Cameron learn how to make a short film. Go and watch some of these student filmmakers and see how to tell a proper film in 20 minutes or less. Bet you can't do it. Bet you can't. You know what I mean? But it's like I'm like film as an art form, whether it's a short film, whether it's horror, whether it's comedy or romance, or it all deserves the same level of respect, but they're not given that same level of respect, and like even like taking her previous film Revenge, like people look at that film and say it's about this woman who's hot, she's young, stranded in the desert, getting revenge on these men. I'm like, but what exactly is she getting revenge for, people? What is she getting revenge for? Tell me.
Rather talk about, and I love talking about the horror elements, and I think that's great, but I don't think they're separated from everything else that the horror elements are lifting. So like when it comes to, I find it very interesting in so many things that I've read about the substance, where people are really focusing like, oh my gosh, it's so grotesque, or so like, oh my gosh, it's so nasty. And I'm just like, why do you think that is? What do you think it's showing? Like everyone's talking about that, or so many people, I shouldn't say everyone, but so many people are talking about that. And I find it very interesting that far less people are talking about the really uncomfortable topics that it's bringing up, like ageism. Like, I mean, that's like such a thing that it kind of continuously goes back to self-hatred, things like that. Like we'd rather just like talk about this aspect rather than like what is actually, and that's how the way in which we talk about horror continues to be just reductive, because we're not actually talking about what the horror is pointing to. I mean, they're continually, I mean, I can go on a whole long thing about just how deeply, I think we're actually more ageist now than we've ever been. And we've always been an ageist society. I thought it was worse before. I thought it was terrible before. Like, this is
It's
just
terrible.
awful.
People are just casually mean-spirited, and again, social media does that because it creates this distance between people, whether it's on Twitter in particular, where people say the nastiest things to you, and I'm like, bet you couldn't say that to my face, you know, but you're gonna say it because you have the protection of anonymity behind a Twitter account, you know, a handle. And again, like, so many celebrities are subjected to that because people say the most cruel and mean things about celebrities over things that are completely innocuous, you know, over things that don't matter. Like why are you calling this celebrity a hag? Like, what are you talking about? She's not a hag. And then using that whole hag thing, another thing that is done in this film is she literally becomes a hag. You know, Elizabeth literally becomes the embodiment of that whole hag, witch, a crone, you know, that whole thing of like, oh, when a woman gets like, they, you know, literally it's like she's saying when woman reaches like what the age of what 50 or whatever, like they say, oh, I'm ready to wither away and turn into dust and like be swept away, and she's like, well, I might as well become this thing that you people say I am. I'm 50, so therefore I must be a hag, a crone, a witch. You know, she becomes a hunchback. You know, her hair falls out, and that's how people view women once you reach a certain age. Like, oh, and all of a sudden, it's like they think that one day you wake up and all of a sudden you stop being attractive or pleasing or useful,
sexual.
Sexual. She just her wardrobe changes. Like she no longer wearing bright colors. She's wearing like these big old school mom shoes, ugly clothing. You know, her nails. She becomes a witch, and like. And it made me like the witch from Hansel and Gretel, you know, like how the fantasy storytelling version of a witch is, you know, like the nose and filled with warts and all of this. And like, and the Coralie's like, well, this is what you said I've turned into, so I'm gonna become literally the embodiment. And they thought that was hilarious. I'm like, that's where a lot of the social commentary comes in.
She becomes the very thing that she was trying to avoid. And she becomes the very thing that she was trying to avoid, but what she was also trying to avoid is aging. And nobody can really avoid that. None of us can avoid that.
That's a part of
yeah. And you know, hag, which I despise that word. I think it's
so much.
But it's really just another way of saying you're just an older woman, and there's nothing wrong with being older women. There's so many older women who are beautiful, who can all just aspire to be, honestly. Just the fact that they got there. No one appreciates the fact that they just got there. They reached a 60.
Like, I woke up and lived to see 60. Amen. Praise Jesus. Like, that's a feat in and of itself. And like, for women in Hollywood, just to be able to survive that industry to reach that age, that is something we should be applauding them for. You've survived this industry that takes so much away from you for this long. That is worthy of applause in and of itself. Like, kudos to you for just that alone. And I think that's really, I think to me, that is what the film is telling us at the end of the day. Like, appreciate the Demis, the Emma Thompsons, you know, the Maggie Smiths, and rest in peace, you know, the Pamela Andersons, you know, appreciate them while we still can. Don't wait till like there are people like Marilyn Monroe to then see her brilliance after she had already gone, you know, and then like
very young, so she didn't actually get to experience old. They love her because she in part because she didn't age.
She died young. So she's forever that image in people's minds, you know, that idea of beauty in their minds, which I think is so sad, because it's like we never got to see her to her full potential. We never got to see who she could have been, you know, and
got to see her the way that people liked her young.
And it's because even like thinking about it, the character of young Elizabeth played by Margaret, she is that, you know, where she was so deathly afraid of aging. She was so deathly afraid of being seen as older that she didn't even appreciate the beauty in who she had become. Like, because like there was this big massive picture of who Elizabeth was. Like, she was old, she's older, but she couldn't see that, she still couldn't see that she was still beautiful. People like, and this is right there in her face.
I mean, I think the thing is like I think I felt like she was definitely afraid of not so much aging, she was afraid of irrelevance, and I think because you reach 50, then you become irrelevant. If you can just reach 50 and not be irrelevant, 50 is fine. But the fact that you can't is a large problem that I feel like in the way in which many people have talked about the substance as really taking away from that crucial issue of just like how it is irrelevant to age when everybody does it. Like I don't understand that. Like it's inevitable for all of us. So I don't know what we're all gonna do then.
It's just like people have these unrealistic expectations of people in Hollywood in particular, or celebrities in general, because if you watch like, and I you know what, and I make this comparison a lot to, I say South Korea and Holland and America have a lot of similarities, and they were there in their some film industry functions with regards to celebrities the same way, where I was reading an interview with another actress. She's about Demi's age, and she's a fantastic actress. But she was saying how a lot of the roles that she was getting were matronly roles, like roles she's playing mothers or grandmothers, and the people whose parents and the people who's she's playing parents too are like just a few years younger than her, but it's just that they look younger than her. And she's like, I'm like 10 years older than you. Why am I playing your mother? Why am I playing your grandmother? And she was saying that she's like, why am I not getting roles that are comparable to men her age? The men are still getting like the action roles. Men are still getting to play these really badass characters. And she's like, I'm the same age as these men, but they want me to play mothers while the men are getting to play spies. And and it's the same thing in Hollywood. And I would say that one thing I would say that the British film industry has done slightly better than Hollywood in that aspect is like, we will still get like the older ladies playing some pretty
badass characters,
right? Like, again, using or even just something as like Good Luck Leo Grant, where it's like an older woman getting to be fully herself as a sexual being on screen. I can't think of the last Hollywood film where that was not a gimmick, where instead of it being a very serious and very matter-of-fact thing, is used as a gimmick.
Well, because we have a very disgusting relationship with it. That's why, and it's manifesting in our movies. And I think that I like that it's manifesting, like how awful we are about age. Like we see that epitomized in the substance, but there's something deeply disturbing about the way in which we talk about age.
So it's the
yeah.
And I don't know if it'll ever change, because not enough people are willing to be as honest about it as they should be,
Yeah, I mean that was part of, I wrote this whole piece that was kind of that was talking about age and with Pamela Anderson, Demi Moore, and Isabella Rossellini in their performances in TIFF films this year. And so much of it revolved around the way in which we talk about age and the way in which it's just weird. I look at it, I see it online, and just like, you guys are weird. Like, I don't know how else to say this. This is just weird.
It is weird.
Like it's insulting, and it's weird, and it's also self-loathing. So much self-loathing. I don't know what are you guys going to disintegrate past 30? I don't know. I fear for you guys. It's just weird.
For the younger generations, we do.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I think but we're gonna wrap up here. But thank you so much for talking with me, Candice, because honestly, you are the only person that I could talk to about this film, because not many people have seen it, and not many people who have seen it think about it the same way that we do. Because I can tell you that I've spoken to some men about this film, and they see this film very differently. how women do, which is interesting. Like
Yeah.
even the cinema and watching other people's reactions and hearing people's reactions were I was just like, huh, you. I'm like, this is funny. Like this particular
Yeah.
this thing is funny. Okay.
So deeply sad. I'm just like, God, I felt so terrible.
Horror, but it's not a horror for the way a lot of people think it is. I'm like, it's a horror because this thing is just saying the things that women put our bodies through, the things that society tells us about ourselves, the things that affects our mental health. You know, is horrific. This is horrific. This is the horror. This is the real horror. Not that she turns into a crone, but
I
it's
mean,
what
that too. It's all together.
all together, but you know what I mean? But it's just like, but it is fascinating. But I'm so happy to be able to talk to him. Like, yeah, we got it done. But this was a great conversation. And I'm just like, it makes me want to watch the film again because just like being able to get a second experience and like like one of the things that I really wanted to pay attention to is just like there's detail. This film is a very visually detailed film. And there's this appearance of this yellow van all the time that I want to ask Coralie Fargeat. I'm like, what is the meaning of this yellow van? Is this the people watching her? And we haven't even gotten into how the introduction of the substance came from a man. And like that in itself is a whole other discussion. But yeah, but this film, there's so many things about this film that I would love to like pick apart and just like talk. We haven't even talked about the costume design. Oh, I love the costume design in this film and the set design. But thank you so much, Candice, for joining me and talking to me about the substance.
Thank you. Thank you so, so much.
No, this was so much fun. And like, as I said, this was an unexpected favorite for me. For Tiff, I was not expecting to love this film as much as I do.
Yeah, I I kind of try to go in with just like moderate expectations, but I was floored.
Me too, me too. And you know what? I think I might. There is I was thinking, would I even say that this film would work as a double feature with Revenge? And you know what? I don't think it would actually. I'm trying to think of another film that I was. Oh, you know what? A film that I think that would work really well with this. Um, it may sound weird, but it's one of my all-time favorite films. It's a film. It's called The Villainess. It's a South Korean action film. And that one is talking, and The Villainess is basically about this woman. She's an older assassin, and she gets underestimated because of her age. People underestimate her, and she's like, "Oh, you thought that I am no longer useful and I can no longer kick ass because of my age? Well,
Yeah,
here you go."
every time.
If you were to do a double feature with the substance, what film would you pick as a double feature?
I might say The Brood, which is a David Cronenberg movie, from the 80s. Really, really good movie. I think it's still probably my favorite from his because I don't love all his movies, but that one I think is top tier. It is, they call it divorce horror, in the sense where it's just like I think what was going on, and I have to, don't quote me on this, but I think if I read it right, David Cronenberg himself was going through a horror. I mean, going through a horror, going through a divorce, and it's kind of manifested in this film where there's this separation of parents, and in the middle is this child, and then you kind of see like and it's not really about age at all. I'm just kind of thinking about the female, the female body of it all, and of the female, the woman making a choice, and the woman making just kind of deforming as the like separation and agony of that just more deeply unfolds. And so like there's a lot of agony connections and just like this whole sense of just de-evolution happening. And I found just a lot of the body horror is kind of similarly attaching itself to really profound themes that we still don't talk enough about.
Gonna look that up. I don't think I've seen that one. I'm gonna look that up. And I'm also gonna change my mind. I wouldn't do a second feature with the villainess. I'd actually do a second feature with G.I. Jane. Demi Moore's other. And in thinking about it, it makes sense because again, like they changed, both characters changed their bodies to fit to an ideal that they shouldn't have to. You know, and G.I. Jane, the more broken her body becomes, the more bruised and destroyed her body becomes, the more people say, you're becoming a real soldier. And I'm like, that is some BS right there. The more she becomes mentally unstable, people are like, no, you're becoming a real soldier. Mentally unstable. Okay. I think actually that would be the good double feature.
Oh my gosh. I have to check that out. That's in my queue to watch.
Watch it. It's really good. She like shaves her head. And I'm like, look, Demi Moore, you have a very nice shaped head. She has a nice, perfectly round. My dog has arisen. She's finally up. But thank you so much, Candice. Yay.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.